Every time the two killer whales come through the bay, the white sharks disappear for longer and longer and longer until eventually it's basically a displacement. Why are these killer whales here? Where did they come from? Their genetics do not match anyone in the database that was already here, killer whale-wise. It's fascinating.
Welcome to another episode of Ocean Talks. I got a really cool one this week. I've got Dr. Alison Towner from South Africa with me. She has co-authored and led publications on white shark populations, wound healing, hunting behavior, movements, tagging, you name it, she's done it. Most recently, she has been working with orca predation studies in which the great white sharks have been, unfortunately, the victims of orca feasts down there in South Africa. And it's gotten quite a bit of worldwide attention. She has been the leading scientist on the necropsies on the white sharks post-orca predations and is continuing the research in that area. And you may recognize her from some of my videos, as she's advised me on many of my great white shark videos here on this channel. So let's welcome Alison.
Alison and my Rhodesian Ridgeback Hooper, who decided to just pop into the chat now.
Oh,
Thank you so much for having me, Carlos, and your now huge platform. Congratulations on that. What an honor to be here.
thank you. And we've been connected for quite a while. You were one of the very first scientists that I connected with, and you really helped me out as far as figuring out what some of these sharks are doing, because I had no idea. It was very, very helpful to my channel. Thank you.
You are so welcome. I still remember seeing sort of your early footage arrive online and thinking, who is this? And where do I get more of this? And so likewise, I think you really did, you put on this whole aerial viewpoint of white sharks first and really sort of opened up many of our worlds to what else is going on with this species. So likewise, thank you.
I know every time we talk, you're somewhere in the field or you're out um, doing a necropsy, unfortunately. I mean, some of that stuff that you're doing is kind of the stuff of a lot of young scientists' dreams. I mean, you're working with great whites and now orcas. Tell me a little bit about how that started. How'd you get started with great white sharks?
Well, my journey with white sharks goes way back. I mean, you can probably tell from my accent, the audience, that I'm not South African. So I'm actually British, but I had to move to the other end of the planet to get close to the species that I've ultimately been fascinated in since I was a child. From about 5 years old, it started, the shark books would come out. I would sit in front of Jaws incessantly. I knew every word, and I come from quite a rural northern part of the UK. So it would commonly be said to me, sort of, where does this shark thing come from? You don't live anywhere near where you get white sharks. I mean, and it actually came from my father, who was, he was an avid basically really passionate about fish, journalist by trade, an amazing writer, and his one dream in life actually was to see a blue marlin and a white shark. And so that passion really rubbed off in me. So that when I was a teen, I already knew, right, this is the path, and no one's going to put me off it. And yeah, I got my undergrad in Wales in the UK, in Bangor University, just my honours degree in marine biology. And from there, it just sort of spurred onwards.
Now it's interesting you went into white sharks because I can't imagine, even though you're a dive instructor at 17 or a dive master at 17, what's there to see in Great Britain when you're diving?
Pike, the odd floating bit of rubbish. No, that's very unfair. So I was up in Lancashire in a flooded
Okay.
quarry. It's called Stony Cove. We had Cape and Rain, Stony Cove. I really do. I remember vividly dropping down and just sort of, when you start scuba diving for the first time and you're that young, just the whole familiarity of it, clearing your mask. And I cleared my mask, and the first thing that was staring me in the face was a pike. And it's quite a decent looking fish for a young girl to see. So that was great. But the coast of the UK is so diverse, and I think there's many amazing places you can go and dive on the ocean side of things. But I was quite limited being up north there. So yes, I certainly changed that up when I then went to the Greek islands and the Red Sea, because of course they're just spectacular places and very spoilt with the conditions after that.
Mhm. So one burning question everyone's always asking, and they ask it on my channel all the time. Do you think there are great white sharks in the UK?
Oh, brilliant question. think there's every reason, prey-wise, condition-wise, especially with global warming now and current shifting and possibly, warming further up into the Atlantic and currents moving, that it's totally possible. Richard Pearce is a really good friend of mine, and he's an author of a book specifically on that topic. He went all around the UK and interviewed all the fishermen and all the anecdotal accounts, but he never really could find any concrete evidence. So I do believe there's potential for them to be there. I believe there is an expedition going off of Ireland here to go specifically to look for them. Especially with conditions changing, with global warming, with tuna arriving back in the UK in places that they weren't. There's all the species there for them. So anything's possible.
Well, I'm going to head there. I'm going to head there
Yeah,
within the next year or so to do a preliminary search and try to see what's going on. I
yeah.
do agree. I think that the conditions, their food, all of that stuff, it just makes sense that there would be some sharks there, some white sharks. But it's one of those mysteries that hopefully we have the technology now to try to solve and
Yeah.
see. I mean, the ocean's so big. If you think about it, there has to be sharks moving through there. There just has to be.
Look at the
You know,
satellite tracks of some of the animals off of between sort of Cape Cod to Canada. They've gone so far over that side of the Atlantic. I mean, it's a stone's throw, really, isn't it, for them to then it's totally possible. Where are you going to go in the UK, or do you not know yet?
I am still putting the blueprints down for where I'm going to start and what I'm going to do. I want to film some basking sharks as well. So it's a little bit of logistical uh, plans that I got there, but I will be definitely talking to you offline about some of these locations
Yeah.
that I believe might be worth looking into.
I
So,
can work a mean bait line if you need crew, Carlos.
okay.
That's all I'm saying. And my chumming's not bad either. So
I can imagine. So, so getting back to your research, you started into great white shark research. That brought you to South Africa, correct?
um yes, I got myself down here very enthusiastically, knowing that this was the best place in the world to see white sharks. And it really was at the time. It was the most accessible location, the most affordable location. It was the cage dive hotspot, white shark capital of the world for cage diving. So it was literally landed in Cape Town, was fetched at the airport, had no idea how stunning this country was. I felt so silly when I got off the plane. I don't know what I expected, but taking the coastal drive to where I'm now based, it's a small fishing town called Gansbaai. I just was blown away by the scenery, and the absolute staggering landscapes here.
So,
Right.
where's your primary research hub? Where's that taking place?
Well, if you just sort of go straight down to the continent of Africa, right at the bottom, the southern tip, it's not Cape Point, even though they do tell you this when you arrive in Cape Town. It is actually Cape Agulhas. And that's the true southern tip of South Africa and indeed the continent. And that is literally, I can cycle there from my house, it's that close. So I'm
Wow.
based right at the tip of Africa, at the southern point. Yeah.
That's incredible. The thing about white sharks, it seems that most people kind of attach South Africa with white sharks. Anybody that knows anything about sharks, that's kind of South Africa and white sharks is kind of synonymous. They were the first country in the world to actually put protections on the white sharks. Was it like 91, something like that?
Correct. That's
And
correct.
and so it's a very important place historically for white sharks, but it's also a place where we're finding a lot of change happening, especially in the last decade. And a lot of your research has taken you into the big whys, what's causing
Oh.
these changes. Your recent paper, you've had a couple papers, but let's go to the first one that was
Mhm.
really significant. The orcas predating on great white sharks. That was something that's been happening for a while, but you wrote a paper that basically documented that very first instance it was captured from the air. Tell me a little bit about how that happened or the history of the orcas. And the big question that we all want to know is where have the white sharks gone?
The question of the hour. Yes. Um, well, it's kind of two stages my time here, because the first 12 years were just the most incredible daily observations of white sharks, tracking them with acoustic transmitters on satellite tags. immersing myself in their world, following them around for hundreds of hours and just seeing such an abundance of them in this one location, and that being the norm here. And the other thing about South Africa, just before we get on to the changes, is don't forget aerial predation. So white sharks flying into the air, like what you see behind me. I mean, that's just a low breach, but this was a phenomenon that the world just sort of locked into, especially on Shark Week, because what a spectacle to see, right? A white shark, especially some of these animals that are 15 foot plus right in the air. And that's basically their strategy and how they hunt Cape Fur seals here. They just launch at the target as fast as they can. The momentum drives them into the air. So it was just a wild time to be here. It was that breaching behavior of Air Jaws is the brand, and Chris Fellows, incredibly famous photographer. The whole legacy was out there, and that I sort of arrived in the heyday of all that happening as well. So it was just, yeah, we never thought, Carlos, that one day it would all be quiet. You just can't. Yeah, if you'd have said to me 10 years into my time here, oh, guess what? One day killer whales are going to come along and this is all going to change. I would have said no way. In fact, the first killer whale I ever saw here was in 2010, and it literally just came around and then off it went. It did nothing. And so I think what we need to be mindful of here is not any killer whale is a killer whale when it comes to shark displacement. And so often they coexist. Where you are off the Californian coastline, it's very common to get groups of killer whales moving through and overlapping in distribution with white sharks. The issue is when you have killer whales that have learned or are highly specialized in hunting sharks. That's when the problem comes around. And we did not have them here. Obviously, otherwise we would not have had that here and the legacy that was. And so it was around about 2015 that things started to change. First of all, in Cape Town, it's almost like you take a set of dominoes and you knock them over from west to east. So Cape Town had its own aggregation site, a lot like Gansbaai, False Bay Seal Island. Again, it's a seal colony within a coastal bay. The cage diving boats anchor there. They see lots of white sharks. You see like 20 in a day. All of a sudden,
Wow.
it goes really quiet there. And the arrival of two killer whales is on point at that time in history. They hadn't been seen in the area before. Two males, very distinctive killer whales because like Free Willy, basically their dorsal fins were collapsed in opposite directions. And in and amongst that time, there was a whole bunch of inshore sharks that washed out. Now, not white sharks, another species known as seven gill sharks, but it was really noteworthy. Wow, what's done this? Who's caused this? And isn't it interesting that these two killer whales have just pitched up? So fast forward to then how it all cascaded. A couple of years later in Gansbaai, it was only in 2017 that things started to really change here. We did start seeing very, very much less white sharks at Dyer Island, which was our seal colony. But the one day I got a phone call, I looked out from where I stay. I actually have a view over the bay, and I can see where the cage dive boats anchor. And I could see the two killer whales in the bay. And we rushed
Wow.
out with boat, we tracked them. They went right over to where the cage diving boats were anchored, so where we know there was white sharks aggregated. And the next day, a dead white shark washed out. And again, the speculation starts. Could it be? Was it them? Are they capable of taking a white shark? But, at that point, it was just sort of like we're getting little dribbles of evidence coming through, but nothing really concrete. It
That's
wasn't.
incredible because there is a precedence for, the orcas being in an area and the sharks disappearing.
Sure.
Um, and in the Farallon Islands, in '97, when that orca predated on a great white shark, I was actually just recently with Scott Anderson
Scott. Yeah.
and Dr. Paul Knive. We went out to the
Yep.
Farallon Islands. They told me, like, yeah, the precedence is definitely there. The orca predated on that shark, and they didn't see any sharks for the rest of the season that year. If you saw it with your own eyes down in South Africa, that's interesting because one, where'd those orcas come from? That floppy dorsal fin is not something that is normally associated with a wild orca, correct? I don't want to go into conspiracy theory, but it's very interesting that these two orcas have a collapsed dorsal fin.
Yeah, it is indeed. And very rare in wild orcas, typically. I mean, less than 4%. But we're starting to see there's not just the two of them here. There's a couple that have this kind of bending to the left look. In fact, there's one that looks very much like Port that's known as Lefty because it's not confusing enough. But yeah, so there's theories thrown out as to how the flaccid fin or the dorsal collapse can occur. It can be trauma. So, for example, it could be possible that these orcas have depredated at fishing vessels, and orcas can cost fisheries millions. Unfortunately, shotguns are on board some fisheries vessels that are unmonitored. It could have been being shot at. It could be trauma from infighting as males when young. It can also be malnutrition or some kind of deficiency in some kind of a vitamin that's not coming through, or immune deficiency. There's so many different theories, but nothing is concrete. It's just sort of all speculative. Um, but yeah, it makes them very easy to recognize, which is very helpful because we've been seeing more and more killer whales up and down the coast now, largely because there's more eyes on the sea through drones, through people being more aware of the ocean, having cell phones, etc., with cameras on. But killer whales can be really difficult to tell apart if you don't have a really good photo ID and a decent catalogue. So yeah, with Port and Starboard, at least we know, right, it's definitely them, and they're the ones that are implicated in hunting sharks. Farallon Islands, as you were saying, Salvador Jorgensen's paper showed a bunch of acoustic tag sharks as well, just vanished and didn't come back for a good part of a year, again in response to killer whales. So there's been plenty of this documented, but it's actually just getting verified on record that a killer's happen. And that's only what happened here later because of your favorite tool, a drone, in 2022.
Yeah, that was incredible. And the interesting thing about orcas is I've been kind of infatuated with orcas this year.
Hmm.
Specifically, I've spent quite a bit of time with orcas actually in the last couple of months. And the interesting thing about them is how smart they are. We all know they're really, really smart, but
Yeah,
not every orca is the same as far as the pods, as far as individuals. It's very hard to just kind of label a behavior to an orca pod because they're so different. Like, give you an
sure.
example, the orcas down in Patagonia that go up on shore and get the sea lions or the seals,
Mhm.
right? They basically beach themselves, grab a seal. That's only known to happen there. That's it,
Yeah, it's
right?
wild, isn't it?
And I sat in on a meeting with some orca specialists from South Africa. They informed me that the orcas in South Africa, for the most part, don't go after sea lions. In fact, they coexist and hang out together. Whereas I just saw an orca destroy a sea lion 2 weeks ago here, and I filmed it. And it's just so interesting why regionally different areas have different behaviors. And then obviously the danger with this is that can
Sure.
they
Yeah.
teach other pods to, hey, this is working to kill great white sharks. Let's gang up and learn how to do this. That's
Yeah, I
what
mean, they're
might be
so
happening
hardwired
there.
into learning efficiently, and that's what they do. A lot of it's matriarchal transfer of knowledge, but exactly, it can take them very little time to learn how to handle a prey species, and then that's sort of their strategy. And as you say, cultural transmission, it just that knowledge gets shared rapidly. And they're just incredible. I mean, here in Southern Africa, they're not really eco-typed as strictly as they are in the Northern Hemisphere, and it's believed that they have to basically diversify on a bunch of prey species to be able to handle the resource or the lack of resources down here in this part of the world. So it's not uncommon that you'll get for example, Port and Starboard do tend to be very much your shark specialists, but they have been seen harassing seals. I think they've gone for sunfish before. It's not uncommon. I mean, even last year or the year before, there was a predation, bronze whaler predation by a group of killer whales that then went on to hunt common dolphin, which the rules just don't seem to be as strict down here in this part of the world with what they're foraging for.
But there has been a little bit of divide in the scientific world as to what's causing the displacement of sharks. It's interesting as an outsider looking in and reading the science behind it, but it's one of those topics that I feel like a lot of shark topics just need some nuance. But I think there's a lot of context that needs to be brought to the table in the debate. What's going
Yeah.
on there? How's your research impacting all this?
Well, thanks for bringing that word up, actually, Carlos, and just sort of giving the opportunity to describe what the nuances are, because often in this world, it's a bit of a misinformation jungle. You get one side of the story or you get the other. And I've always said with these killer whales, I mean, it's never not been controversial. It cost the industry here, the cage diving industry, a ton of money. I mean, they just lost all the white sharks overnight, basically. People feel really emotional about it. How can orcas have had such an impact? There must be more to it. Absolutely, I agree. And scientists I collaborate with and co-author with, we all agree something's caused these killer whales to come in, but they're not from here. So likely that is a consequence of habitat degradation or climate change or overfishing or a whole conglomerate of threats that they face offshore or even around the coast here. But the fact of the matter is, whether we like it or not, these are highly sophisticated predators. they've arrived here, and it is absolutely preposterous to suggest that they haven't had an impact. I mean, we're only looking at white sharks in South Africa in sort of like 3 coastal bays regularly that have seal colonies and that have cage diving businesses in them. There's a 22,000 kilometer coastline or so. It's a huge area, and these are not South African white sharks. They are Southern African. So they are Madagascan, they are Mozambican, they are subantarctic, and they're occasionally Australian. They have a massive range. Their distribution is huge. And when they pull into these coastal bays, depending on their age, they use the space differently. And so very large parts of the South African coast within their range have not been monitored or explored because they're simply remote, or it was easier to study them in the Cape, right? So now we've got this research that came out. Like, I remember when the dead white shark started washing out, the first one to wash out, eviscerated, with it opened with its liver gone. Because let's just touch on that. The killer whales are taking their livers out and then dropping the carcass. Like, that's all they're going for.
So
I
why are
remember
they taking that liver? What's so important with the liver?
it's so nutritious. It's packed full of lipids and oils. It's like having the juiciest Texan steak and just cutting all that fat off it. That's where the good stuff is. And they are so sophisticated that they've just learned that that's the part of the animal that they like because they are such good predators in what they do, and they don't need the rest of it. And also there's questions about shark meat and what sort of things accumulate in shark meat that might not be preferable. But regardless, it is the livers they're going for. So I remember right at the beginning, before the papers even came out, doing these necropsies, sort of standing around with colleagues looking at these massive sharks with their livers ripped out, and the comments coming onto social media. Definitely can't have been killer whales. Must have been poachers. Poachers have fed them explosives. That's what's happened. And the debate starts to rage and. So it's never not been controversial. People don't want to sort of admit that, okay, flip, nature's had its own display here, and it's profound. So we put out the paper on the carcasses with all the little bits of information that sort of led us to the theory that the killer whales were hunting the white sharks. But it wasn't until May 2022 that a hobbyist drone pilot just down the coast from where I was based, so this is the next aggregation site along, it's called Mossel Bay, was flying his drone. And I remember getting the phone call. I was at sea this side, and he was like, Ali, you will not believe what I just caught on my drone. I just saw orcas killing a white shark. And I'm like, did you get it? And he's like, yep. Thank goodness. So now, silver bullet, there's nobody can argue these killer whales are doing this. They are doing it efficiently. And it's not just the 2 that we know are doing it, it's actually others as well. So cultural transmission's a thing. So the first paper sort of just described, hey, this is what's happened in this coastal bay, dead white sharks, disappearance of white sharks after the events. Every time the 2 killer whales come through the bay, the white sharks disappear for longer and longer and longer until eventually it's basically a displacement. And in the wake of all of this, we're seeing ecological changes at a rapid rate. We're seeing an island system that's getting kind of all out of balance. We've got too many fur seals that are spending too close to the island, long time periods. They're encroaching on African penguin colonies. There's a whole bunch of wacky stuff going on, which is quite complex to describe.
That
So we've
pyramid
got
is so important. But if you think about what you just said, that's the importance of having the sharks there as kind of a regulator of populations, right? That apex
right,
predator role. When you
yeah,
displace those sharks, then you start seeing that domino effect you're talking about.
yeah.
For our audience, I think that's really important to kind of absorb the importance of why it's these sharks of all species, right? Are
Oh, they
so
have a critical role. And, far scarier than an ocean with sharks is an ocean without sharks. That's the thing. And it happens rapidly. Things change almost immediately. We started to see big ecological changes, which showed us how important it was having the white sharks around in the first place. So all of this is happening. And then finally last year, we got another sort of piece in this mystery, let's say this murder mystery that we weren't expecting. And that was an observation of Starboard. So I don't know if I've mentioned this, but the killer whales, the 2 males that have the collapsed dorsal fins are called Port and Starboard. And these names are given to them because it's basically both sides of a boat, a vessel, your left and your right. Because their dorsal fins collapse in opposite directions, hence their names. So Starboard was seen killing a white shark all alone, so solitarily, and it took him less than 2 minutes. He dived down and he came up with the liver, And then he went over to one of the boats that was observing and kind of showed the boat his prize. And that just blew my mind, because now I'm thinking, hey, right, we know that they can hunt white sharks. We know that they can cause displacements, but to kill one alone, and we know the killer whale was alone because its accomplice, Port, was just way around the other side of the seal colony, nowhere near. So this was just another layer to this whole perplexing but absolutely fascinating phenomenon. And so
Two
what's also happened
minutes.
now in these bays is just this complete disruption in white shark abundance, where they were just reliable aggregation sites, now devoid. You're really lucky if you see one or two. And that's all what started to happen between 2015 to 2017. So that's the one side, it's evidence-based. There's 4 publications, scientifically peer reviewed, no, 5, out on this topic, showing with evidence this is what's happening. But acknowledging the difficulties and the challenges in assessing abundance trends in white sharks in general. If you look back in the literature worldwide, there's always debates about counting white sharks is horrible. They move really far. They pull in and out of coastal zones. It's really hard to monitor them. It's expensive. It's always a debate. So pulling into the whole picture now, the other side of the, let's say, the what's been proposed is, no, actually, the killer whales haven't caused this. What's happened is there was a decline already in 2011, which definitely doesn't sort of trend with the data I was collecting, but there was a decline already in 2011, and this was driven by fishing of prey species of white sharks by demersal longliners and the KwaZulu-Natal shark nets, which is a lethal gill net program and drumline program, which selectively removes sharks for bather safety. And absolutely, there are many threats. And Alison Koch put out a brilliant paper, Dr. Alison Koch, in 2022, looking at satellite data and just showing, she actually quantified, the amount of threats they exhibit and the percentage of time they spend in areas where there's such high threats. So there's no lack of knowledge here, but a decline is very different to a disruption and a shift. And so our consensus is, with the best available data, that a partial shift has happened in the population. Now, we're not saying all the white sharks have run away from the Western Cape to the Eastern Cape. That's not what we're saying at all. We're saying that most of them have probably scattered like a jar of marbles. Some of them have probably shifted east because that's safer grounds. They're not getting orca predation as a threat. And probably a large amount of them have died that we don't know about because they haven't washed out. But we have seen what Port and Starboard are capable, just the 2 of them within a couple of hours. They're incredibly efficient, and they can, not only hunt and kill a lot of sharks within a small space of time, but like we were saying, drive them away out the localized areas as well. So it's just really important to consider, both sides, follow evidence. When you've got predators returning to a spot again and again and again, is that animal really going to stay around and endure that imminent source of death, or is it going to shift away? Why is it really important to have the right information out there? Well, bather safety, of course. We've got huge amounts of people that enter the water here in South Africa. And now I'm collecting data with colleagues in the Eastern Cape where we hypothesize that a cohort may have shifted to. And guess what? Record numbers of white sharks. Drones up in the air, helicopters. They counted 46 white sharks along the beach the one day, 20 another day. This is a real bather safety issue as well. And so ecologically, bather safety wise, we really need to be mindful of the bigger picture and not try and compartmentalize different sides of the argument when actually white sharks are fully protected in South Africa, like you said.
You show time and time again that it's not just one visit. It's multiple. It's a pattern, and it's a pattern of coming back. So it's just as feasible that 2 orcas can displace 300 sharks as it is that they can't, because but the pattern is there. So I personally believe that the orcas, definitely, having talked to my scientific friends at the Farallon Islands who have a precedence for this behavior, I believe that has to be a major role in why they've displaced. Now, I'm not here to give an opinion per se, but I will say, again, the nuance part of it is so vital. And that's something that I've read in your paper, that you're not saying it's just the orcas doing this.
No.
And that's so important, and something that the media leaves out is not, it's the sharks are not leaving because of the orcas. There's so many facets to this. So I do enjoy, the controversy and reading both sides, but at the same time, orcas can play a big role in this, but we're not helping matters as humans.
No,
You know,
no.
the long line fishing that was allowed to be near shore, for example, that has to have an effect. That has to have an
Yeah.
effect. But it's not one or the other. The nuance
No.
is what's important here.
Yes, nuance always is important with science, and I really commend you for bringing that onto your platform because it gets lost. We always have said from the beginning the dots are connected. Why are these killer whales here? Where did they come from? Their genetics do not match anyone in the database that was already here, killer whale wise. It's fascinating, right? And it does lead to the theory that something's driven them in and it's man-made threats. And yes, we've got gill nets on the east coast of South Africa that are there for bather safety, which of course they're the highest targeted source of mortality for white sharks in this region, 40 a year sometimes.
Wow.
Of course, all of these threats are out there and they're all in the literature, and it's not about sort of dismissing any of it. And we just have to be evidence-based and truthful. And I'm always about following the data and being transparent and open and get it out there into the world so people can make their own mind up.
It can't be lost, the fact that you're out in the field. I have a question for you. So it just popped up in my head, thinking about the scene of when you show up and there's a dead white shark on the beach and
Yeah.
you don't know what's killed it. And you've done this many times, unfortunately, recently. What's it like when you go up to a 2,000-pound animal?
Yeah, Carlos, when Port and Starboard originally came into Handspy and started their slaughtering in 2017, for about a week and a half, I just stunk of dead shark. I mean, I would come home and you already met my ridgeback hooper behind me. He would just be so happy to get to my gum boots, my welly boots, just to get all the dead shark off. Yum. It was pretty gross, but what an opportunity to get samples, to get data. And it would literally be a whole day event of picking that white shark apart internally, weighing its organs, looking for anything that could have been of interest, to further our science, not to waste the opportunity of a dead animal. And again, just to sort of maybe ascertain how it was killed or any kind of clues. And always in white shark necropsies, we find the most incredible things in their stomach.
Oh,
I've had dolphin heads in them. We've
wow.
had 6 Cape fur seals all combined together within a
Wow.
white shark's stomach before. It was like something off a Tim Burton movie when we opened it up, these heads and eyes and flippers everywhere. I mean, we called that shark Pac-Man because we think it probably just swam around the island just munching seals in half. And they were
Wow.
all at the same level of decomposition, like crammed into its stomach. Fascinating anatomically. So simplistic actually when you open them up.
Yeah.
Once the liver's gone, it's really just a stomach and a spine. And then I
Wow.
just want to get stuck in. I'll climb in the shark almost. I can't get enough of it. And I've had many of my volunteers and interns over the years that have just, even though it's been sad, and I am going to say the emotion's sad, it is sad when you see white sharks being killed again and again, even if it's a natural predation. But
Hmm.
they say, at least, we didn't get to see the white shark so much on the ocean side of things, but wow, that necropsy was fascinating. We'll never forget that.
Can
So yeah,
imagine. Wow.
it was a really, really fascinating time, and it's not stopped, Carlos. I mean, the sharks are still washing out with the livers ripped out.
Wow.
It just
Well,
continues.
hopefully your dedicated work to it will get us closer to finally resolving what's the root cause of all this. And that's a good segue for what's going on, which is a segment that I'm going to show to scientists
Yep.
that is concerning my footage. And I
Okay.
want to show you a few pieces of footage here that I filmed recently that just makes me ask the question, what is going on? Well, this is, I wouldn't call this incredible. It's just very interesting to me because something that I noticed the more I flew the drone, the more I observed sharks is they were making circles all over the place. They swim in these circular patterns. Sometimes I would film 2 or 3 of them just doing these circles. Lot of theories about what's going on out there, but the leading theory is that they're sleeping. I'm wondering what you think. Have you ever seen a shark sleep? What do you think's going on?
Well, I've never seen a shark sleep, and theoretically, with white sharks, if they stop swimming, they're ram ventilators. They need to keep oxygenated water flowing over their gills in order to survive, right? So if they
Mhm.
stop swimming effectively, they will sink and they will asphyxiate. So it's not an option. What I have seen them do, and this is what I'm thinking, looking at this beautiful circular footage I'm seeing, and the fact that there's just 2 stand-up paddle boarders there, totally oblivious. Um, is it could be similar to the behavior we see here in the breakers or in Shark Alley, which is a very it's a very narrow channel, but it's very oxygenated. It's got a good current going through it. So you'll often see the white sharks just sort of stop and swim very, very slowly,
Hmm.
almost let the water do the work for them. Wow, that shark is so close to these guys. They've clearly clocked it now, hey?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I love how blasé and secondary that is to like, oh, what is the shark doing? But as you see, it's banking around now and it's continuing to do these beautiful circular loops. It's plausible, Carlos. The animal could be trying to sort of stay within an area that is, favorable to it,
Hmm.
with minimal effort, minimal efficiency. And it's got some kind of cue that it's able to just sort of keep pulling around to keep it in that region. As you say, if it heads straight, it's going to head offshore. Don't know the size of the animal, it's hard to gauge, but I would say maybe juvenile.
Yes,
So
it's
if
definitely juvenile.
does yeah, it does have larger sharks to consider, other predators.
So this next clip is something that's really interesting. I can't find an answer for this. The sharks, well, I call it kind of a Jello movement in their gills, but this is
Mhm.
the Jelloing effect. And look at those gills. The shark is actually pooping simultaneously here too. But I've seen this behavior a lot without the pooping simultaneously. Here's another example of it. In this version, you can see stuff coming out of the gills. So right here, look at the white stuff coming out of the gills.
Yeah, yeah,
So this happens a lot.
yeah. So that is absolutely fascinating. I'm getting really distracted by that really chunky caudal peduncle. Look at that, hey, they are so impressive.
Yeah.
So, so thick there by the caudal region, and it displays so nicely on that aerial. So I've seen them do something almost similar around a cage diving boat environment. So anchored up, there's chum in the water, there's bait in, and shark rocks up a white shark that's consumed a seal. And we know it's consumed a seal because the intestines are trailing from its gills. And then you'll see that sort of shuddering behavior that you just showed, or jello behavior as you described
Mhm.
it. I mean, they've got a whole digestive system going on in this really ancient setup of a body that they inhabit. And it might be just sort of to get things moving along a bit, right? I mean, as you were saying, the shark was actually pooping at the same time previously.
Now this one's not
Um,
pooping, but this one you can see it starts the Jello behaviors again here, and it's. I've also noticed that this is more predominant within the larger, almost subadult white sharks. I don't see the very small
yeah,
sharks doing this very often. In fact, I don't think I've seen a really, really small juvenile do this. It's always been
always the bigger
sharks like
one.
this. I mean, this is you can see the girth on this one. This is a big. Look at that
Yeah,
tail; it's thick, right? So,
beautiful animal, yeah. So larger shark would typically consume larger prey. We know from isotope studies led by Nigel Hussey here in South Africa, over 9 feet in length, white sharks start to consume more mammal meat, more pinniped, more of your seals, for example, bigger prey
mhm.
items that take a bit of digestion and a bit of chomping down, right? As opposed to your youngsters, sub 9 feet, that are predominantly feeding on your fish, your skates, your rays, your smaller sharks. So it could be a function of just trying to sort of pass through the system a larger prey item. Could also be oxygen related. I mean, if you could sample the parameters environmentally of where that animal is, and if it's, they are run ventilators, so if it's low oxygen,
Hmm.
it might just sort of need to flush its gills with a bit more water to get more breath in some ways, right? Breath's not the right word, but you know what I mean, more oxygen into the bloodstream.
That's a
Um,
very interesting take. I've not heard that before, but that is very interesting. It makes sense.
I mean, I'm being speculative because
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
actually, I'm just
Yeah.
throwing out ideas, but
Here's another behavior here. Now, this is the second kind of gill-like behavior I see, and this is more of a flaring instead of a shuddering or jello behavior.
yeah,
This one I notice they do more often when there's other sharks around or other fish or something that's around that they don't like. So I think this is a response possibly to
right.
kind of like a cat does, like a cat makes itself big.
Yeah, yeah,
That's what might be happening here. I'll fast forward it here, and you can actually see that right there.
yeah. Is there
It's
something
quite
in the shark's
beautiful.
mouth, or am I? No, we can't
No,
really
he's
tell,
just
can
has
we?
his mouth wide open. He goes out with his mouth wide open. Look how he took like a big gulp there, like he swallowed. So there might be
Yeah,
something in his mouth. But
yeah.
I
I mean,
see this a lot.
I've
Here's
seen whole
another version.
stingray barbs lodged into the white shark's mouth before. I mean, that's
Hmm.
going to cause some kind of obstruction there, and Fascinating. Another paper, I believe, Carlos. You just have to get enough of us on board to try and come up
Yeah.
with some decent theories and compare notes.
And one last piece of footage here I'll show you because I know this is kind of something you worked on in the past. Something I film a lot of here is sharks and large sharks going through and over kelp beds. And look at this beauty going right over the
Oh,
top
my
of a kelp
favorite,
bed.
sharks in kelp. Yay.
Yeah, so I've been recently filming some really large sharks over kelp and near kelp. And yesterday, for example, I was filming, there were sea lions just hanging, sunbathing on the kelp right in the area where I keep seeing these big sharks going. I think that they're going through that kelp and just sabotaging or surprising
Oh,
some of these sea lions. I think that's what's bringing them
absolutely
to that
possible.
spot.
Yeah. I mean, kelp's a great way of keeping your predator conspicuous to prey. So it's camouflage in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the seals can use it as raft or as some kind of, it feels protective, right? But we've seen at
Mm-hmm.
Dyer Island, I mean, with the CATS cams on, Oliver Jewell's work from University of Western Australia in conjunction with Sal Jorgensen's lab.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they film predations inside kelp. That means absolutely possible. So, and it was always a theory here with the surfers in South Africa. Oh, but I'll just go surf in the kelp. It's fine there. And I'm like, no, not
Yeah.
from what we've
Uh-huh.
seen. If you think about it, if we can navigate in kelp forest with scuba tanks on our back, of course a white shark can easily maneuver in and out. Probably
Yeah.
not thick, dense kelp, but your more sort of open, fragmented areas. Absolutely.
Well, Allison, I want to thank you for joining me this week. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. I always learn something when I talk to you, and it's always a pleasure to just share my videos with you and get your insights. It makes me just even more curious, and it actually inspires me just to go out there and spend more time in the field and try to get you some more footage like this.
Oh,
And
thank you, Carlos. It's always wonderful looking at your footage. Never stop sending it.
I definitely will be sharing more with you. And I look forward to getting out to South Africa. I do plan to get out there really soon. It's far from me, but it is definitely somewhere I want to get out to and we'll connect there and hopefully I can
Yeah.
help you get some data from your local shark populations that are
Yes. I
still
just
there.
wish we could have you here now with all the white sharks on the Eastern Cape side where you could
Ah,
get your drone up and we could be like, "Ah," but like you say, it's far, but you will get here eventually. And we
yep.
cannot wait to have you.
Thank you, Allison. And I'm going to link in the video for my audience. I'm going to link to your different papers so that
Great.
they
Thank
can
you.
review what you've written, especially the orca, great white shark stuff. I think that's a fabulous read if you want to learn about both species and a lot of the nerdy stuff that's involved. I'm going to link
The
to those.
CSI factor, the murder mysteries. I
Exactly.
just want a disclaimer. I've led some of the work, but it's such a team effort here, Carlos. It's so many
Hmm.
people here, and I can't claim credit for what has been one massively collaborative study, bringing in killer whale expertise, your likes of Dr. Simon Alwyn and David Hersford. You know, there's so much intel that's been instrumental to understanding. But thank you so much for sharing the papers and making those accessible.
No problem. And thanks for joining Ocean Talks, and we'll have you on again soon.
Thank you so much. I can't wait.